Fuellmich λοιπόν γεννήθηκε το 1958 στη Βρέμη. Είναι Γερμανός δικηγόρος, απόφοιτος του Πανεπιστημίου Γκέτιγκεν με μεταπτυχιακό μάστερ στα νομικά του UCLA και διδακτορικό στο Πανεπιστήμιο Γκέτιγκεν. Είναι ένα κατεβατό, συγγνώμη, αλλά πρέπει έτσι να το μεταφέρουμε. Καθηγητής της νομικής σχολής του Πανεπιστημίου του Ανόβερου και της Ινδιάνα των ΗΠΑ. Λέκτορας στο Πανεπιστήμιο Ταρτού της Εστονίας. Μέλος της Επιτροπής Βιοειθικής των Πανεπιστημιακών Νοσοκομείων Γκέτιγκεν και Ανόβερο. Εργάστηκε στο παράρτημα της Deutsche Bank Financial Institution Department στο Τόκιο, στην Ιαπωνία, από το 1990 ως το 1992. Από το 1993 έχει ιδρύσει δικηγορική εταιρεία, η οποία το 2009 κατατάσσονταν στις 20 καλύτερες νομικές εταιρείες για την προστασία των επενδυτών στη Γερμανία. Υπήρξε ένας από τους βασικούς παράγοντες για την καταγγελία του σκανδάλου της εκπομπής ρήπων της αυτοκινητοβιομηχανίας Volkswagen. Δεν δίστασε να μηνύσει την Deutsche Bank για υποθέσεις εξαπάτησης Γερμανών δανειοληπτών σπιτιών. Είναι εκπρόσωπος της μη κυβερνητικής επιτροπής Stiftung Corona Ausschuss, η οποία ερευνά ζητήματα που αφορούν την επιδημία του κοροναϊού. Συνεργάζεται με άλλα διεθνή δικηγορικά γραφεία για την προσφυγή εταιριών ή ομάδων πολιτών σε δικαστήρια των ΗΠΑ, class action, με στόχο την απέτηση αποζημιώσεων λόγω κακών χειρισμών των κυβερνήσεων κατά τη διάρκεια της επιδημίας και κυρίως τη χρήση της μη ιδιαίτερα αξιόπιστης δοκιμασίας PCR. Είναι πρόεδρος του γερμανικού κόμματος Die Basis, το οποίο ιδρύθηκε στις 4 Σεπτεμβρίου του 20 από ακτιβιστές που αντέδρασαν στις πολιτικές που εφαρμόστηκαν κατά τη διάρκεια της επιδημίας. Το κόμμα αυτό, αν και νεότευκτο, κατετάγει 8ο στις πρόσφατες εκλογές στη Γερμανία. Dr. Fuellmich. Να σας μεταφέρω επίσης, συγγνώμη, ότι ο κύριος Fuellmich θα μας πει αυτά που έχει να πει και η μετάφραση θα ακολουθήσει συμπτυγμένη κατά κάποιο τρόπο στο τέλος για να κερδίσουμε και χρόνο. Το ζήτησε ο ίδιος. Ευχαριστούμε. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm extremely happy. I'm extremely happy to be here. I am honored. This is a privilege. This is a very, very special occasion and a very special place. This is the cradle of democracy, and this is where we will defend democracy. And because this is a really important occasion, this is the first time I brought my wife with me. She wants to be here too with you. I'm going to tell you a story, a true story, first the facts, and then how we can get out of this problem. And then I will also address the false rumors that have been spread by someone. Let me first start with the facts. I am the co-founder of the Corona Investigative Committee. We founded this in July of 2020 because we did not get any answers from our governments or the mainstream media. Now we know they're not our governments, they're not our mainstream media, they're owned by the World Economic Forum.
Yes. Yes.
When we realized that we would not get any answers to those very basic questions, how dangerous is the virus? How reliable is the PCR test? Was it misused in order to create cases that didn't exist? And how dangerous are the measures? The mask mandates, social distancing, and of course the so-called vaccines. When we didn't get any answers, we decided we will do it ourselves. We have interviewed more than 400 experts from all over the world, experts from all walks of science, including my now very good friend, Dr. Mike Yeadon, the former vice president of Pfizer, also their chief science officer for 16 years, a very good man who doesn't have anything to gain from telling the truth, including other people like Professor Luc Montagnier, a Nobel Prize laureate from France. But also former and active politicians like Catherine Austin Fitz, who is a former Secretary of Housing and Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the United States, but also an investment banker who knows a lot about finances and how they're trying to control us through a digital currency. We also listened to many psychiatrists and psychologists. Why? Because much of what we're seeing is not real. Much of what we're seeing is a grand illusion that was created through psychological terrorism. The other side is not omnipotent. They're not half as strong and not half as intelligent as they try to make us believe. We are the ones who know what's going on. We are the ones who are asking questions, who are creative. They are not. Among the psychiatrists and psychologists who are very important because they can tell us how they are doing this, how they are manipulating this society, are Professor Peter Breggin, the best-known psychiatrist in the United States, Dr. Ariane Billeran from France, Meredith Miller from the United States, and many others. To talk to them was extremely important to see and find out that we are being manipulated. There is no pandemic. This is an invention. It's a plandemic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me now tell you how this all started. And I'm telling you this not because I'm so smart, but because I listened to the expert who we spoke with. Behind all of this is the idea of eugenics, which has now turned into genocide. It is time to tell the truth. It is time to not mince any words anymore. It's time to call a spade a spade. This is eugenics, and it's turned into genocide. Why am I saying this? Well, it all started with Charles Darwin's ideas of survival of the fittest. Then in 1906, the British Eugenics Society was founded. In 1925, I believe, the American Eugenics Society. And the same people, the same institutions that are behind this are the ones who are running the World Economic Forum and are trying to manipulate us, to make us be in a panic mode forever, because that's the only way how they can manipulate and tell us what to do. Only if people are in panic will they follow any order. So, the people who are behind this are the same that are behind World War I and World War II, who financed both sides. They are the ones who are trying to drive us against each other. The Germans against the Russians, the Americans against the French, the blacks against the whites, the vaccinated against the unvaccinated. But that is not the enemy. We, as humans, are not each other's enemy. The real enemy are the people who are behind this. Probably a few hundred, maybe a few thousand, but they're using lots of money to bribe politicians, doctors, lawyers, the media. It's only a few hundred, so if we say stop, it'll be over. Because we are the ones who are creative and who ask questions. We are the ones who can make this stop in a minute. I'll tell you why. This is what we're dealing with. The World Economic Forum is the platform, the most important platform for everything we're seeing. They're controlling the World Health Organization, NATO, the World Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and all the other global institutions, global NGOs. They're also controlling global corporations. I know what I'm talking about because as a lawyer, I have been fighting these global corporations for a long time. Everything, all these global institutions are run by the same people. People who believe that their money and their power gives them the right to tell us what to do and what not to do. We know. We know, of course, what's best for us. We know what's good for us and what's bad for us. We don't need anyone to tell us that. That's why we should organize in our regions and set up our own system. I'll explain a little bit later. So, who's behind this? Is it our politicians or the mainstream media? No, it's the World Economic Forum that runs the show. They're using the politicians, they're using the mainstream media, they have bought them, and they're puppets. They're not our politicians, not our governments, it's theirs. Now, who is the World Economic Forum? The World Economic Forum was founded in 1971. Most people believe it was founded by a man by the name of Klaus Schwab, a truly evil person. That's only half the story. The other part of the story is that Klaus Schwab in the 1960s attended Harvard University in the United States. His father had tried to help Hitler build a nuclear bomb, but the Americans were faster. Klaus Schwab himself tried to do the same for South Africa when they were under sanctions. He failed too. But he didn't fail at this task. So what happened is, at Harvard University, he met Henry Kissinger, who was a war criminal. And Henry Kissinger introduced him to a CIA-funded program whose intention it was to gain control over Europe by influencing European politics. That's how they founded the World Economic Forum in 1971, and in 1992 they started the Young Global Leaders Program, and this Young Global Leaders Program created almost all of the politicians who we thought we voted into office. There was no choice. It was all creatures, products of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders Program, including Emmanuel Macron from France, including Justin Trudeau from Canada. This is all out in the open. They even boast that they have infiltrated half the Canadian Parliament, and they probably have. Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, and our President of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen. She's another creature of this Young Global Leaders Program. I agree. She's a criminal and she is corrupt. And she has failed at every job she has ever held. Most of the puppets we see know nothing. They have made up biographies, they know nothing, and that's why they're so easy to handle as puppets. Now, let us take a closer look at what's behind this, apart from this structure, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the EU. The EU is one of the tools that they're using in order to take away our assets. They have been looting and plundering our public coffers for decades, at least for 30 years, probably for much longer, but we can trace it back to the last 30 years. How did they do it? Well, on the platform of the World Economic Forum, in their annual meetings in Davos, they infiltrated politicians. This is where 1,000 global corporations meet every year with politics and people from the media, and also some very important persons. They call it private-public partnership, but in reality, they have taken over. This is a hostile takeover of our public politicians and our public institutions, our agencies, a hostile takeover of these agencies by rich, super rich criminals. And they have taken away as much as they can. The first time we should have known this, I should have known this, because I once worked as a banker for Deutsche Bank, one of the most criminal organizations in the world. The first time we should have known there's something seriously wrong is 12 years ago in 2009, when we had the housing crisis, which turned into a world economic crisis and into the euro crisis. Remember that, because Greece was the first victim of this. They stole everything from you. But don't worry, we'll take it back. We'll take back the airports. We'll take back the airports from the Germans and those who are behind the Germans, and we'll take back the ports from the Chinese and those who are behind the Chinese. It's always the World Economic Forum criminals. So, how did this pandemic start, and why is it not a pandemic, but a plandemic? Well, first of all, you have to know this is only part of their toolbox to keep us in panic mode. It's the pandemic, it's the Ukraine crisis, it's global warming, it's food shortages, it's energy shortages. This is all made up. This is part of a grand illusion. The pandemic doesn't exist. The Ukraine crisis is really a proxy war between the United States and NATO, which is the puppets of the United States, and of course, Russia. So what about this pandemic? Well, on September of 2019, this is 10 years after the housing crisis, which turned into the world economic crisis and the euro crisis. In September of 2019, there was another crisis. This would have been much, much worse than the economic crisis of 2009 and 2010. Overnight, banks wouldn't lend each other money anymore. That's called a repo crisis. Who solved the problem? The Fed, the American Fed, which is a privately owned central bank, privately owned by the very same people who are driving this pandemic. They gave so much money to the banks that the whole thing did not explode again. But they were in a panic because now they knew that many of us understand what is going on. And they needed to divert our attention from their stealing our assets, your ports, your airports, your islands, to, oh, there's a pandemic. We have to be very careful because we are threatened. Our lives are in danger. That's how they did it. And here's how they did it in detail. I will briefly explain to you. When they needed to have our attention distracted from where they stole our assets to, oh, there's a pandemic, they needed cases. This is in early 2020. They didn't have any cases. Some of you may remember the pictures from China where people fell over and it looked as though they died instantly. We don't know what it was. Was it staged? Was it real? We don't know. But there were no cases in early 2020. But they were under pressure because many of us were waking up. They needed to divert our attention. How did they do it? Hang on one second. recreated the cases. With the help of a German criminal, he's an idiot and a criminal. His name is Professor Dr. Drosten. He's neither a real doctor nor a real professor. He was asked by the World Health Organization to provide the foundation for the pandemic. And he came up with two lies. The first lie is that there are asymptomatic infections. That means that everyone is dangerous for everyone, no matter how healthy they look. There's no such thing as asymptomatic infections. It's a blatant lie, and he knows it. Because if there were asymptomatic infections, then no doctor could cure us. Because imagine, would you go see a doctor and tell him, I think I have a problem? The first thing the doctor will ask you is, what symptoms do you have? And the only thing you can say, I have no symptoms. I watch too much Fauci, too much Drosten. I think that's who the ambulance came for, Fauci and Drosten. So, this is a blatant lie. Drosten knows it. The WHO knows it. They knew that there are no asymptomatic infections, but that's what they needed in order to make everyone afraid of everyone, and that is the basis, the sole basis for testing, mass screening of perfectly healthy people, because asymptomatic means healthy. That's what it is. So, that's the first lie. The second lie is that Drosten said, I have invented a PCR test that can tell you exactly who is infected and who is not. That's a real bad lie. This was the one on which everything we see is based in this pandemic. All of the measures are based on the lie that a PCR test can detect infections. The mask mandates, social distancing, and of course the so-called vaccines that are not vaccines at all, but experimental injections that are killing people. And here's why a PCR test cannot tell you anything about infections. Many of the people who are here are healthcare workers, who are heroes because they're fighting this system. They understand what I'm saying, but I think you will understand too, because I understand. So the two major reasons why a PCR test cannot tell you anything about infections is, one, a PCR test cannot distinguish between dead and live matter. That means if you test positive, it is very likely that you only test positive because the PCR test finds the fragments of your body's immune system's fight against the common cold or the flu. Most common colds and flus have the coronavirus in them as well. So it's very possible that that's the only thing they find. A former dead fragment of the coronavirus, which can't hurt anyone. It's not infectious. That's one reason. The second reason why the PCR test cannot tell you anything about infections is this. It will never find a whole virus. But you need for an infection, you need a whole virus to enter your cells and start to replicate. And that's when you have symptoms. You have a headache or a stomach ache or a diarrhea, you have symptoms. The test never finds a whole virus. Why not? Because whatever you take from the swabs, from the nose or the throat, and that is put into the machine where it's magnified, it is crushed. It is crushed, it is destroyed, it is mushed. That's why you never find the whole virus. For these two reasons, a PCR test under no circumstances can tell us anything about infections, and that's why this is at the basis of all of the legal fights that we're fighting. Because this is how you show intent. This is not negligence, this is not by chance, it is intentional infliction of harm. It's intentional mass murder. And here's why it's intentional. You might say, well, Drosten and Fauci and the World Health Organization, they're stupid, they don't understand these things. But here's how they did it. They took the test and misused it. How did they misuse it? Well, in many different ways, but the most important way is they blew it up. They used so many cycles of amplification that the result is totally distorted. I'll explain why. You put the swabs into the machine, the whole thing is crushed, and then you go 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and so on, cycles of amplification. Everyone agrees that at 24 cycles of amplification, it starts to become totally useless, totally unscientific. That's at 24 cycles of amplification. We now know, thanks to Dr. Mike Yeadon and thanks to many other scientists, that at 35 cycles of amplification, you end up with at least 94% false positives. The Drosten test, and all the others that followed his blueprint was set at 45 cycles of amplification. At 35, you get 94% false positive. What do you get at 45? So that's how we will show intent in the courts of law. That's how they created the cases. Why did they create the cases? Because they wanted to announce, to declare a public health emergency of international concern. That's the pandemic. Public health emergency of international concern. That's an international health emergency. Why did they need that? Because only on the basis of an international health emergency can you use totally untested drugs on people. And this is what's happening. The vaccines are not vaccines. They're experimental injections.
Ναι. Αλλά το κάνω σε βίντεο στο κινητό και μετά το βάλω στο YouTube και μετά το παρουσιάσω στο Facebook.
In order to use untested new drugs on people, and that's what's happening right now. This is an experiment. It's a medical experiment with no one controlling it. No one. In order to use these untested new drugs, they needed a public health emergency of international concern, and for that, they needed cases. And they created them intentionally by way of misusing the PCR test. That's the entire story of this pandemic. The result of this is, I think, now becoming very obvious, not just here in Europe, but also in the United States. Because it turns out that many people who get the injection suffer very, very serious side effects. Intended, by the way, intended side effects. In the United States, we have new numbers from a man who got 3 shots, I believe, and his family did 2. A billionaire by the name of Steve Kirsch. He understands very well what's going on, and he has the money, he has the means to take a closer look. So what he found out, based on the official register of adverse reaction, that's called VAERS, Vaccine Adverse Reactions System, something like that. What he found out is that since the start of the vaccinations, there have been 1.6 million deaths after vaccination. 1.6 million deaths. Now, I'm not saying that there's causation proven, but at least there's correlation. And I'm also saying this. These figures demand a closer look at what's going on. A very close look at what's going on. We have a German pathologist, a retired pathologist by the name of Professor Burkhardt. He now collaborates with 50 pathologists from all over the world. And I think, if my memory is correct, he did post-mortems, autopsies on 70 people who died after vaccination. And he found causation for their death by the vaccinations, by the shots, in 90% of the cases. In 90% of the cases. So if 90% of 1.6 million is the number that's real, then it's very, very, very bad. It means we're facing mass murder. It means we're facing genocide. Now, what can we do? What can we do? 3 things. First of all, we must continue to speak the truth to power. We must get the truth out. Because we are now gaining a lot of support even from those who were deceived, who were manipulated, who got the shots. They're beginning to ask questions just like we did right from the start. They will join our forces and they will make us even stronger. So we must continue to speak out. You know, some people crack under pressure. I don't. And you don't either. We must continue to do this. What we should also do is all of us realize this is not about global power. No global corporation, no global NGO has the power to tell us anything. We should, all of us, disconnect from NATO, the EU, the World Health Organization, all of these. We don't need them. They need us. We should send them straight to hell.
Yes.
Their system is collapsing. Their system is collapsing right before our eyes. It is collapsing. There's no way it can be saved. It makes no sense. I used to think, oh, maybe if we do something and reform the judiciary or the medical people. No way. This system is dead. They have had at least 30 years to infiltrate their people into the political system, the mainstream media, the healthcare system, etc. We must set up our own parallel system. We can still have one foot in their system. We can go see movies at their movie theaters, and if it's necessary, we can even go into their hospitals. I wouldn't do it because it's dangerous in there. But at the same